Everyone, and welcome to today's Surge webinar co-hosted with VCoach. We are joined today by communication specialist Betsy Butterick. First off, I want to thank you all for being here today. We know as coaches, parents, educators, and athletes, you are all extremely busy, therefore we really appreciate it. Today's content is titled Bridging the Gap, Communicating with Gen Z Girls to Build Trust and Connection. Be sure to stay engaged throughout the presentation for a chance to win some fun giveaway prizes from VCoach. With that being said, I'll go ahead and we're going to watch a short Surge video before we get to introductions. Thank you all very much.
As a Surge member, you'll unlock access to resources that build confidence, motivation, and mental well-being to empower girls to stay in the game today and pave the way for their future success. Up your game with free professional development and curriculum resources for coaches and athletes. Foster community and connection with VIP access to girls' sporting events, coaching forums, giveaways, and workshops hosted by industry-leading partners. Make waves with exclusive Surge branding packages, designs, and apparel. Recognize and celebrate with special awards like Team of the Season and Athlete of the Season to uplift and honor your female athletes. Unlock exclusive offers including new product sneak peeks, promos, and member-only Surge stores. Fresh content designed to empower female athletes will be added to the platform every month. So, together, we can help power girls forward.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much. My name is Marcy Cornegie, Director of Programs and Events for WeCoach. And for those of you who are joining us maybe or heard about WeCoach for the first time just now, we are a nonprofit membership organization solely focused on you, providing much needed resources to help recruit, advance, and retain women coaches. We provide year-round programming and membership benefits that help women coaches thrive in the profession. We're excited to collaborate with our partnership with BSN Sports and the Surge community. And I just thought about it. It's sort of like this excitement to merge with Surge, and we are really excited about being a part of this. So thank you for your partnership. I've got a couple of teammates on this call. Vanessa Fuchs, our CEO. I'm sure she'll introduce herself in the chat. And if we've got any other teammates, they will be involved as well. We will be giving away a few giveaways and prizes for participation engagement. We'd love to hear what you have to say, and you are in for a treat with Betsy Butterick. She's been a part of our community at WeCoach for many, many years and part of our faculty, and she's pretty much tenured at this point with us, with our Women Coaches Academies. So we're thrilled to introduce you to Betsy. She's known as the Coach's Coach and Communication Specialist. Betsy brings a massive amount of experience helping teams and leaders elevate their impact through improved communications. She's got this really, really unique blend of humor, insight, and you will be walking away with these actionable items that you can go and strategize with your teams and programs. She's here to help us get better. Every time she speaks, I get better. So thank you, Betsy, for being here. As most of the country is freezing right now, let's warmly welcome Betsy Butterick to the room. Thanks, Bets.
Thanks, Marcy. And thank you, everyone, for being on. Thank you to BSN Sports and to Surge and to WeCoach. I really appreciate the tenure. Like, that's great to know. I can't wait to tell my wife afterwards that I finally achieved tenure. Today is focused really on creating connection with the young women that we coach. So whether you are coaching at the college level, the high school level, the club sports level, the youth level, we are fully in the range of coaching Gen Z, and behind them coming up Gen Alpha, and as of 2025, Gen Beta. And so today is largely about creating understanding, providing a little bit of context for why kids these days are showing up in a different way than previous generations, while also giving you actionable tools that you can use to better communicate and connect with today's young people. This session in full runs about 75 to 90 minutes, depending on how deep we go. Because we have a little less than an hour at this point, I won't be able to cover everything, but I will cover really, I'll say, some of the more implementable or high level or actionable things that you can do within the content today. So without wasting any time, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you all. And all right, can I get a thumbs up that you see Effectively Coaching Gen Z? Okay, quick background. I've been doing work on Gen Z specifically for the last 7 years. And what I'm going to share with you today is the newest iteration of this work. And it's based off of thousands of conversations that I've had with current athletes, members of Gen Z. And so everything that I'm sharing today is based off of the work in the field. Before we dive into the specifics about this work, we need to start with a little bit of context. So when we're talking about Gen Z, we're talking broadly about individuals that were born during or after 1996. And the unique hallmark of Gen Z, and again, Gen Alpha, Gen Beta behind them, is that these generations have never known life without the internet. Now, you might be thinking, okay, great, that's like the internet was somewhat revolutionary. I get why that's a big deal. Quickly, I want to take a little more granular look. I'm 41. I was born in 1983. That makes me an elder millennial. We are very wise, also very humble. And in my lifetime alone, the changes in technology have been incredible. So when I was a kid, we had one phone and it lived in the kitchen and it had this really long spiral cord that you could stretch and get like 3 rooms of bandwidth. And at that time, most people didn't have answering machines. So if I called a friend, phone would ring and ring. And if nobody picked up, then I would hang up and do this thing called waiting, which also seems to be a lost art for many of us, not just Gen Z. I think about the fact that if I wanted to know something, I had to go to a place called the library and use a tiny little golf pencil and something called the Dewey Decimal System to look up the location of a book that hopefully had the information I wanted to know, or ask someone older and presumably wiser than me. I think about the fact that kids these days will never know the devotion that it took to make a mixtape. And this pains me. Like I can see my yellow Casio combo radio cassette player and waiting for the Hot 9 at 9 to come on and hitting record at exactly the right moment and then stop and then leaving a little dead space. Now it's like, who knows who they're sharing their playlist with? In school, we had a computer lab, but we only used it for one of two things. One was word processing. I still only type with these 3 fingers on both hands. And it printed out on these long reams of paper that folded like an accordion and had perforated edges. We were not going green at all. Or we used it to play what I still think is one of the best games in the history of games. And this is the first interactive opportunity. Would you put in the chat, if I said the best game in the history of games, what game might I be talking about? First person with the correct answer will win a prize. Oh, yes, tie, Oregon Trail. I will say, I love Tetris. Great answer. But yes, I'm talking about Oregon Trail, black and green. I almost always forded the river. It was rarely the right decision, but this is part of how we learn. As I got older, I had a pager, and 143 still makes my heart flutter a little bit for anyone that had a pager. And then in high school, I had a cell phone, but the only thing you could really do with it was call home. And now I look at my phone and it unlocks with something called Face ID. So in my 41 years, the changes in technology have been incredible. And it's important to walk down this path because I want us to start to understand that the context, the world in which these kids, the young women that we're coaching today have grown up in, is completely different from previous generations. Now, each generation has their own experience of evolution and change. This was a really big one. And it's showing up in the way that we are experiencing today's young people. Second interactive opportunity. And Marcy, I'm going to let you pick maybe a favorite answer or two. What I want to invite everyone to do is I want you to put in the chat your answer to kids these days. If you had to finish the phrase, kids these days, blank, what's true in your experience? Kids these days, and then fill in whatever comes to mind. All right, entitled, tech savvy, short attention span, soft, excel at technology, anxious, impatient, compassionate, self-advocates, curious, care a lot about how they're perceived, emotionally intelligent, full of life, struggle to bounce back after failing, disconnected, need instant gratification, adaptable, amazing, overworked, overwhelmed, entitled, not committed, overwhelmed, busy, too many options, overscheduled, lacking manners, stressed, want to be more inclusive, more open. Okay, this is great. And all of this is true. And what I want to really focus on today is, especially for those of you on the call that may feel challenged in some ways, and many coaches are across sports at all levels, with connecting with young people today, I want to offer you a variety of tools to be more intentional about creating that connection. If we can reach them, we can teach them. And often a lot of young people today get criticized for some of the skills that they don't have in spades that were more innate for previous generations. We're going to cover all of why that's true and what we can do about it. So what I hear from coaches across the country is similar to what you see on the screen. So much texting, even if they're sitting next to each other. It's like they're Snapchatting pictures of foreheads. It's weird. They have short attention spans. They can't accept criticism. There's always a reason why. It's not completely their fault. And there's this almost constant need for reassurance and validation. When we're talking about Gen Z, at a high level, these are some of the important elements for you to understand. We're talking about individuals have shorter attention spans and stunted social skills. Now, I'll pause and say, if you are a member of Gen Z on this call, you don't have to be a communication specialist to know it's a very awkward situation when people talk about you as if you're not in the room. So for all the Gen Zers out there, I first want to say, hi, I'm Betsy, and now we're going to talk about you, okay? And I'll say, if you hear, members of Gen Z, anything that you feel in any way is a misrepresentation of who you take yourself or your generation to be, please make that known, because it is critically important to me that I'm advocating on your behalf. I say that in part because when I say stunted social skills, that can sound like a jab. It's not meant to be. It's an acknowledgement that because of technology, Gen Z has had fewer opportunities to engage in certain skills, like face-to-face communication. We didn't have texting when I was growing up. You had to talk to people either in person or on the phone. You could write a letter, but it's going to take a while to get there. So this is an acknowledgement of less reps. And I'm fully in the camp of coach as educator. So for any of you out there, I'm inviting you to think of whatever frustration you might face with a lack of skill or deficit that you see in young people today. I'm going to invite you to think it's not impossible, it's simply unpracticed. And coach as educator, how can we be intentional about creating opportunities for young people today to start to practice some of the skills that were maybe more innate for previous generations? The second thing I want you to pay attention to, when we're talking about Gen Z, they have an incredible ability to skim read and digest bite-sized amounts of information at incredible rates, but getting and holding their attention can be a bit of a challenge. They're visual communicators. If you look at the popular apps, you'll see that we're raising a generation of highly visual communicators. This is absolutely something that we can lean into as coaches and educators. It says accustomed to chat-based forms of communication. It's easy to think texting. I want you to expand that to mean short exchanges of communication, even when it is face-to-face. Additionally, highly educated, industrious, and collaborative. Again, thank you, Internet. And then more realistic than optimistic. Because of their access to information, Gen Z, Gen Alpha has a better understanding of what's really going on than previous generations. For older generations, if it didn't happen in your hometown or to somebody that you knew, at best, we were watching it on the news or reading about it in the newspaper the next day. That's completely different for kids these days. They value honesty and leadership. They're data-driven and accustomed to instant expert feedback. Again, that's accessible with a few keystrokes. And this is the scary one. This generation has been disproportionately conditioned over time to value the opinions of others. And we see this play out in various ways, especially in the sport environment. They care so deeply about what their peers think about them that they move differently. And we'll explore that a little bit as well. So a lot's going on with kids these days. And I'm so excited by this generation. Every time I have the opportunity to work with Gen Z, and I'm continuously in various contexts with current athletes, I'm impressed by the quality of character, by the possibility, by the way that they're showing up differently. Can it be a challenge? Sure. And there's so much that we stand to learn from engaging with today's young people, which is why connection is so important. When I was putting this presentation together, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if looking back over the last 5 years specifically, looking at the notes and the data from thousands of conversations with Gen Z athletes, what if there were some themes that came up that were true across sports, across genders? And then wouldn't it be even cooler if those themes created an acronym? And I remember I was on a flight, I travel a lot. So it was about 32,000 feet when I'd finished doing the data scanning and the themes had come out and the acronym that emerged was cheats. And I was so disappointed. I was like, man, as someone who spent a large amount of time advocating for coaches to better understand today's student athlete, I don't think the message I want to leave people with is that Gen Z cheats. So I went back into the data and to see if there were additional themes. Thankfully, there were two. And instead, the acronym changed from cheats to teachers, which as soon as it emerged, I felt, yes, like this is the thing. Because if we are open to learning, Gen Z has so much to teach us about a quality sport experience. And that's really what we're going to explore today. What are the most important themes to today's young people that need to be true in order for them to have a quality experience that also are themes and elements that if we lean into as coaches, make us better quality coaches and educators. So we're going to follow that acronym teachers and dive into some of the content. Beginning with the T, transparency. Gen Z craves transparency. And again, if you look through the lens of context, their access to information, with a few keystrokes, they can ask any question that's on their mind at any time. So they greatly value transparency, and this has become an expectation in their sport experience. So I love the definition on the screen, a situation in which activities are done in an open way without secrets so that people can trust that they are fair and honest. When it comes to transparency, a few things that I want to hit on. Leading with the why. And again, if this is not currently a common practice for you, this is essential for today's young people. Before we give them the explanation of what we're going to do, we need to give them the information. Why does this matter? Why is this important? How is this relevant? How does this apply to me or we in the context of a team? Setting expectations. This is one of the more controllable areas that I see for coaches of all sports. When we are very clear about setting expectations, that then allows our athletes to show up differently in that space. I'll say bias as a communication specialist is oftentimes when I talk about setting expectations, what I see from coaches is they've got their team, they have a team meeting, and they tell the athletes what to expect. Here's what we expect of you as athletes. Sometimes it stops there. A slightly better version is here's what we expect of you as athletes. Here's what you can expect of us as coaches. Where I'd love to see the conversation evolve to is, are we asking them, what expectations do you have of us as coaches? And what can we expect of you as athletes? When we have that full conversation, here's what we expect of you, here's what you expect of us, here's what we expect of you, here's what you can expect of us. Now we can look for alignment. Where are we already aligned when it comes to expectations? And more importantly, where are we misaligned? Because if we can address early any misalignment so that we create shared understanding, now we're operating in a space where everybody knows what to expect, and our athletes are more likely to meet or exceed our expectations. Articulating the process. A common phrase in sports, especially from a coach, trust the process. Two challenges there. One, trust is tricky. And by and large, what I found to be true about trust is that most people, the way they walk through the world is one of two ways. There's individuals, I'll call these individuals, let's say Camp A. So Camp A individuals tend to walk through the world with the perspective of, you have my trust until you break it. In Camp B, what's true for these individuals is, you won't have my trust until you've earned it. So I want to pause here and ask you to reflect for yourself, what's true most often? And without fail, someone says, well, Betsy, it depends. Yes, always, because context matters. But in general, for most situations in life, are you someone who's more in Camp A, you have my trust until you break it? Or are you more in Camp B, you won't have my trust until you've earned it? What I'm going to invite you to do is in the chat, simply put A or B with whatever is true for you. I'm going to scan it quickly and let's see what's coming up. Okay, a lot of A's. We've got straight A's. I'm just kidding. I saw some B's there. Okay, and thank you for those that chose to reply. In any group, I often see more Camp A than more Camp B people, except when it comes to Gen Z. So if I'm working with coaches or adults, I see a lot of Camp A. When I'm working specifically with members of Gen Z, it's almost 50-50, if not more skewed towards, you won't have my trust until you've earned it. Part of this is trust is tricky, right? If you're someone in Camp B, and I'll be really clear in saying neither camp is better than the other, however, these are different camps. If you're a coach and you have athletes in Camp A, the task is pretty straightforward. You already have their trust, work to maintain it. If you happen to break it, actively work to repair it. If you've got athletes who are in Camp B, the first question I have for the folks in Camp B is, what is your criteria for somebody earning your trust? Do you know what it is? And if you don't yet know, no judgment. Great question to spend some time thinking about. The follow-up question is, how do you want to make that criteria known to the people in your team or organization that you're hoping to build trust with? Most of us hope that over time, we build that trusting relationship. we can cut that time frame down or expedite that process when we're really clear about what's involved for earning trust. This is a conversation you can have with your athletes at any time. The second part, trust is tricky, trust the process. The second part, the process. Because of technology, the process looks very different for young people today than it might have looked for us while we were an athlete, or even in an earlier part of our coaching career, depending on what age you are currently. Rather than asking them to trust, because trust is tricky, simply shifting the language to embrace the process. We're inviting you to get your arms around this, to be actively involved or engage in the process. Simply shifting the language can remove some of the barriers in order for them to be more open or engaged with the process that we lay out. Related to laying out that process is, of course, setting expectations. Additionally, owning mistakes. This is for us as adults. Owning mistakes as often as necessary. When you make a mistake, and especially as leaders, I get it. We are tasked to know. You are the person who's in charge. You're the coach. You are tasked to know. First thing I have for you, and this is not something you have to answer the chat, but when was the last time you said to a group of young women that you're coaching, I don't know? How frequently does that phrase come out of your mouth? Because when it comes to transparency, they would much rather know that you don't know than you trying to pretend like you have some sort of answer. Because whether you know or don't, they're probably also going to ask the Googles and find out what information is out there. We're better served if we don't know to say, you know what, I don't know, or that's a great question. Let's do this. Do a little research. Let me know what you find. And I'll do the same thing. And let's talk about this tomorrow. So we can engage them in spaces, owning our mistakes. If we make a mistake at any point, owning it publicly. When I say publicly, I don't mean on social media. I mean with whoever it's most important to own it with, followed by what you intend to do to avoid making the same mistake in the future and how you intend to remedy whatever mistake has been made. When you model this for today's young women, you are also teaching them by the way that you move, how they can handle mistakes, how they can handle failures. We know that mistakes are going to happen. The sooner we can model as coaches, this is how we can handle mistakes, and this is how we as a team or an organization handle mistakes, it increases the transparency incredibly. Additionally, inviting questions. You may have noticed Gen Z has a lot of questions, and I constantly hear coaches frustrated by this. Because they have access to information, especially outside of practice, when they have some form of technology, they can ask any question at any time. Let's do this. How many of you in the room have ever been asked a question by a young woman who, when they asked that question, it felt like some challenge to your knowledge or authority, or it felt disrespectful in some way? If you're nodding your head or raising your hand, even those with your camera off, here's the thing, it's not meant to be. They're simply executing a very well-practiced skill. They are able, outside of their practice time, when they have technology, to ask any question at any time. They're seeking for information. They're quite literally using you, the coach, as Google. They're not thinking of it as rude. They're not trying to be disrespectful. They're looking for information. So as coaches, shifting our mindset, inviting questions. Now, because many of them have a lot of questions and we don't have time for all the questions, creating a little structure around it can be beneficial. So let's say I taught something to my team. I might say, okay, what 2 questions are the most important for me to answer right now? And then we're going to try this, and then I'll pause again, and I'll take 2 additional questions. So you can put constraints around or structure around the questions that they ask, but they have questions. And if we don't answer them or find out at least what their questions are, they're likely going to seek that information from a variety of sources, many of which may not align with how we serve or how we seek to teach or what we're trying to accomplish together. And then finally, make predictions. This is by far the best litmus test for transparency in any team. If I were to take your team and sit them down and say, okay, I want to find out from you, how is your coach likely to respond in a few different situations? And I give them the situation or scenario, and then they tell me, either individually or collectively, how they think their coach will respond. Their degree of accuracy absolutely correlates to the amount of transparency in a program. If your players can answer with a high degree of accuracy how you would likely respond, what that tells me as an objective outsider is they know you really well. They understand what you're about. They're clear about expectations. When those answers are all over the place or they simply don't know, that usually tells me transparency has got room to grow in this program or team. So that's a great litmus test, and you can try it out. Even if you ask your team as the coach, how do you think I'd respond? Find out what they know. And if you get low accuracy from how you know you'd respond, then maybe you've got some work to do on transparency. All right, we're going to move into the E in teachers, which is emotions. Gen Z has all the feels, and they've even got language for it. Our opportunity is, how do we help them learn to self-regulate while also using the energy of emotion to facilitate growth and resilience? A few different things that we can do. The first is emotional intelligence, and that was something that was mentioned in the chat, that this generation is more emotionally intelligent. Some yes, and some less so. I want to go context here first. If we think about the fact that most members of Gen Z experienced COVID during a formative time of their growth and development. So whether they were already in high school or they were in middle school or even late elementary school, they missed out on 2 to 3 years of social emotional learning that otherwise would have happened in the context of school with their peers. Oftentimes what we're seeing with kids these days, especially when they get to the college level, is they might have a chronological age, but a maturation that's a little bit lower, or they seem a little more immature, especially when it comes to emotions and the ability to regulate those. Again, it's not impossible. It's less practiced in part because of going through the pandemic in the way that they did. Increasing our own emotional intelligence. In any room, if I ask for a show of hands, how many people in the room would rather not talk about your feelings? Without fail, about half the hands in the room go up. And I say, great. I want to ask because we're about to talk about feelings, and because regardless of your current level of comfort, talking about feelings, talking about emotions, we cannot escape the fact that as people, we have them. And as athletes, they have them. And if we're not intentional about teaching our athletes how to work with emotion, their emotional hijacking in moments of challenge and adversity, especially in competition, is their competitor's greatest strategic advantage. When you are out of control emotionally, unable to regulate, you are unable to then take action and get back to the task at hand. So when you see players ruminating from play to play about the mistake that happened a while ago or the last time they were at bat, or, there's a lot going on here. If we're going to be skillful in helping young people work with emotions, we first need to increase our own emotional intelligence. The good news is you can do this at any time. There's a variety of books out there. There's, I'll say 2 that I love. One is called Permission to Feel. Fantastic book. Permission to Feel. The other that I highly recommend is called Emotional Agility. Both of these will teach you broader perspectives about what emotions are and how to skillfully work with them, your own or other people's. Emotional granularity, the sifting of big emotions to get to the more core, the more accurate. In any given day, a variety of people that care about us will ask us some version of, how are you doing? Or how's it going? And we have some pretty rote responses. Good, fine, busy, tired, meh. My favorite is, can't complain. Anytime someone says, can't complain, I'm like, well, do you want to? Do you want to talk about it? So we have these rote responses. And when I work with teams, what I'll often do is put a feelings wheel or emotions wheel up on the screen. It's a brightly colored wheel. Around the center are what are known as core emotions. These are emotions that most people have a high degree of experience with, things like anger or joy or sadness. And then radiating out from those are more nuanced emotions. If you want to start to build your emotional vocabulary, and I'll back up and say it's very challenging for something to exist if we don't have language for it. So building language around emotions allows us to become more skillful, not only in working with our own emotions, but in working with the emotions of our athletes as well. So what I'll invite young people to do is start to work around the wheel. And when you hit upon a word that you don't know the definition of, fantastic. Stop there, look it up, and then ask yourself the question, when is a time in my life where this has been my emotional experience? By indexing your history, you're now better prepared to recognize in the future when you're having that emotional experience. So deepening our emotional vocabulary is something that we can do as coaches, but we can also help young people start to do as well. Understanding tears. A good friend and colleague out at UCLA, the head women's soccer coach, Marguerite, fantastic team culture, very successful program. And in her office, they have something that the staff has dubbed the crying couch. Now, this is a culture of really content, happy players, and many of them still cry. Sometimes happy tears, sometimes frustrated tears, sometimes, hurt or embarrassed tears. But the question that I've heard with greater frequency over the last 3 years specifically from coaches of all sports is, Betsy, what's with all the tears? Like, why are my players crying more than they've ever cried before? To that end, while it's not an answer to the question, I'm going to invite you into a different perspective. When our athletes work very hard physically, they sweat. And we expect them to sweat when they're working hard. If we think they should be working hard and they're not sweating, we often question how hard they're working. I want to invite you into the idea that when a young person is working very hard emotionally, they might cry. It's a different version of hard work related specifically to emotions instead of the physical work, often related to the skill or the sport. So if we can start to see tears as hard work and understand that when an athlete is challenged, whether it's hard work physically with a skill or hard work emotionally, what's most beneficial is often support. So can we start to see tears as hard work? The energy of emotion. Let's do this. Another opportunity perhaps for a giveaway. In the chat, whatever first comes to mind, and you can write as many as you want, when you hear the term positive emotions, what emotions come to mind? Positive emotions, put whatever comes to mind in the chat. Happiness, joy, laughter, grateful, confidence, more happiness, more gratitude, authentic, excitement, happy, joy, grateful. Awesome. Okay, pause there. That's fantastic. I want you to flip. What are negative emotions? When you hear negative emotions, what words come to mind? Anger, frustration, doubt, more anger, grumpy, shame, sad, frown, sad, rage, in all caps. Love that. Repressed, anxiety, anger, great, hate. Yes. Okay, let's pause there. And again, thanks for your participation. It was a trick question, but it proves a larger point. Especially here in the United States, we are culturally conditioned to think of emotions as positive or negative, good or bad. That's rarely helpful, especially when it comes to the young women that we're coaching today. Because if they have a positive emotion, we think of that as good. But then when we don't have that positive emotion, and the reality of emotions is they come and go. When we don't have that positive emotion, then we have a little bit of doubt. When we have an emotion that is largely labeled as negative, now young people often have shame, self-loathing, self-criticism, frustration. Instead of labeling emotions as good or bad, can we see them as a natural part of the human experience and instead start to think of them as having an energetic quality? Like rage in all capitals, that's a big emotion. Great. You've got a young person who's feeling rage. That's a lot of energy. What do you want to do with that energy? Not you as a coach, but what do they want to do with that energy? Same thing, joy. That's a big emotion, a lot of energy. What do you want to do with that energy? If we can start to think of emotions as having an energetic capacity. Now, when we think about anxiety, that's also a big emotion, but in a differently felt way. How do they want to channel the energy of that emotion into some sort of action that feels supportive for them? This is a question we can start to ask. This is a mindset that we can start to invite them into. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through the next two, but I will say, I believe learning to pass, that I believe is an Instagram post that I did, and it's teaching coaches how they can work with young people to manage emotions specifically in a moment of challenge or adversity. And the PASS acronym stands for pause, accept, sense, support. Finding an anchor, again, I don't have time to go into the details, but this is an activity that I do with teams, teaching them how to anchor. What stability can they find when it feels like the water is getting rough, when they feel like they might capsize? And there's so many different ways to anchor, all of which are helpful for young people. The one requirement when we talk about anchoring, the one anchor that I say you have to pick from all these options, but the one anchor I want you to start practicing intentionally is some anchor related to your breath. The reason is our breath is always with us. And if we ever find ourselves in a situation where our breath is no longer with us, we have much bigger problems to address. But the breath is something they can work with intentionally over the course of their life. It's almost imperceptible to other people, depending on what technique they use. So these are a few of the ways that we can start to help athletes work with their emotional experience. Moving on to affirmation, the A in teachers. To Gen Z, who they are is more valuable than what they do. And yes, social media often highlights the outcome, the end result. And the things that tend to go viral are about the behind the scenes, the failures, the process. Valuing themselves as people is part of what I love about this generation. Even though there's a lot of self-doubt, even though there's a lot of self-criticism, even though we're seeing rises in anxiety and depression and suicide, specifically among our young people, which again is an added reason to double down on connection. Our invitation is, how do we start to shift our language from praise to affirmation? In order to explore this, we first need to identify what's the difference. So praise, affirmation, they're often used in similar context. In your experience, what's the difference? If you've got a thought about the difference between praise or affirmation, go ahead and add it to the chat. Let's explore this a little bit together. Affirmation is more about who they are. Praise is about what they do. Yep, the person versus the action. Okay, yes, I'm seeing a lot of exactly what we're looking for. When it comes to praise and affirmation, and I heard it best articulated by a member of Gen Z when they said, praise is about what you do, affirmation is about who you are. If that's the only definition that you remember to differentiate between praise and affirmation, that's going to be enough. So when it comes to praise, and I will say, if the options are no praise or praise, in a sport context with the young women that you work with, please go with praise. Praise is not bad. Praise has limitations, and the elevation of praise is affirmation. So when I think about praise, I often think about a helium-filled balloon. It rises up, it's big. If you pop it, it's loud, everybody notices, but then it's gone. That balloon's not usable again. Praise operates much the same way. It feels good in the moment to our athletes. They notice it, maybe others notice it, but in the absence of our praise, then oftentimes we see maybe a decline in self-confidence or a decline in self-worth. So praise is often focused on outcome or performance. Think about pop. When it comes to affirmation, if you were to scroll down on your phone in the weather app, there's often a section called AQI, and it stands for Air Quality Index. And I think this is a great way to start to think about affirmation. When we lean into affirmation, we start to create an environment, although invisible, much like the air that we breathe, we create an environment that is supportive, that is life-giving. Affirmation is often most focused on the qualities or internal aspects of an individual. And I'll give you a common example I hear in sport. I'll often hear a coach say something like, great job, I love that. Two challenges. One, non-specific. Context is the barrier. In practice, as a coach, I'm watching what's happening in real time. An athlete does something that's good. I say, great job. I don't feel the need to be specific because they did it. I saw it. We're having the same experience, so it feels redundant. When we are specific and we name the behavior, what was great, the athlete is more likely to replicate that behavior in the future. So the first challenge, it's non-specific. Great job. I love that. This is where it gets really tricky. And I'm a love person. When we say, I love that, our intention is positive. We want to let them know that was really great, so great that I love that. I would love for you to do more of that. And what we are unintentionally doing over time, if that's a common phrase that we use, is we are conditioning our athletes to perform to please us instead of performing simply because they have the ability to do so. So it's really tricky. Great intention, often negative or unintended impact for our athletes. If we take great job, I love that. What would be the affirmation version? Might be, that was a great decision, because they own their decision making. So I want you to start to index, and this is one of the pieces. We won't go through the mirror exercise right now, but when I say let's try it, I would love for you to start to be intentional about listening for the praise phrases that you often use. Write them down, even if it's on your phone or whatever's accessible. If you keep a notebook nearby, write them down and then ask yourself, how could I shift that from praise to affirmation? Remember, praise isn't bad. Praise has limitations. If we can start to lean into affirmation, now we're really creating connection and support with the young women that we're coaching. When it comes to choices, Gen Z loves to co-create. Technology has allowed them to customize so many elements of their life from a very early age. So that same desire comes into their sport experience, except it's often unspoken. So in giving them choices, we allow for customization of their sport experience while increasing their ownership and accountability. Two things that I hear from coaches of all sports they would really like to have more of in today's athletes. Again, we won't touch on everything here, but there's a great quote in psychology, and it says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our ability to choose, and in our choice lies our growth and our freedom. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space lies our ability to choose, and in our choice lies our growth and our freedom. And I say the hokey pokey because, folks, when it comes to Gen Z, this is what it's all about. Can we acclimate them to choice? Can we use the language of choice to increase autonomy, to increase accountability, to increase engagement? This is something that we can do through conversation. CDC, this is something I put into practice with almost every team I've ever worked with. Choices, decisions, consequences. Now, when I do this live, I ask people by show of hands, when you hear the word consequences, or do you think positive or negative? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Most everyone says negative, and that's with adults. Members of Gen Z, Gen Alpha, absolutely think negative. So you can do a quick example to show that consequences on their own are neither inherently positive or negative. They're simply the result of what happens when we make a decision. For example, if let's say I have a 7 a.m. practice as an athlete. Before practice, I have a choice. I can eat breakfast or not eat breakfast. Let's say I make the arguably positive choice to eat breakfast. What are some of the positive consequences that could result? People say, increased focus, mental clarity, Betsy's not hangry. These are all good things. Same positive choice. I chose to eat breakfast before practice. What might be some negative consequences? Maybe I'm a little bit late or I have to wake up a little earlier. I don't sleep as much. Maybe I didn't make a healthy choice. Now I've got like a little cramping in my stomach. So it's a very accessible, relatable example to illustrate that consequences on their own, neither inherently positive or negative, but we tend to think of them as negative. If you want to circumvent that completely, simply substitute the word consequences for the word outcomes. So choices, decisions, outcomes. By and large, the word outcomes for most people has a more neutral connotation. The framework is this. In everything we do, we have a choice. Now, you may not love or like the choices that you have, but you do have a choice. And I'll have student athletes tell me, well, Betsy, I don't have a choice. I have to go to class or I have to go to practice. Technically, you don't have to go. You may not like the outcomes that result if you make that choice, but you do have a choice. So in everything we do, we have a choice. Based on the choices available to us, at some point we pick one, that becomes a decision. And then based on the decisions that we make, certain outcomes happen or don't happen. Choices, decisions, outcomes. Once we put this in place with the young women that we're coaching, now we get to speak to them in the language of choice. So in any situation or context that they bring to us, we can listen and then say at some point, okay, so given the context or given what's going on right now, what choices do you have? So we're putting it back on them to articulate or at least start to think through, maybe in a way that they never have before. What can I control? What choices do I have? In doing so, especially for young women, we are actively teaching them to be the agents or orchestrators or directors of their own life. We're also teaching them that based on the choices that you make, certain things will or won't happen in your sport experience, in your relationships, in your life. So choices, decisions, consequences. Training their eyes. I'm going to skip over this part again in the interest of time. Choosing your heart, I am going to talk about. And you may have heard this phrase. I'm using it in a variety of contexts. Instagram knows that I have 2 young daughters, 3.5 and 1.5. And so I'm constantly spammed with different parenting reels, one of which was immensely helpful. And it was a mom advocating for all parents to teach their kids the phrase, choose your heart. And the example she gave was in regards to her 7-year-old son. She said, it's hard to stop playing your favorite video game and go clean up your room. It's also hard when you can't find your lucky soccer jersey because your room is such a mess. Choose your heart. And I love this because in a sports context, we can use it in a variety of ways. It's hard to give your best effort every day at practice. It's also hard to get to the end of a season and wonder what could have been if you've been a little more intentional about your effort along the way. Choose your heart. The reality is for Gen Z, because technology has created so much ease, today's young people have often started to equate hard with bad, without thinking that when I don't do something because it's hard, there are other things that are also hard that may result from that inaction. And this is why it's important to start to teach. All right, helpful. This is largely in regards to feedback. So Gen Z values instant expert feedback. Opportunities to offer feedback that deepens the learning experience and sets them up for future success. Now, you'll often hear from young people like, just tell me, coach, like, I just want to know, like, tell me the truth. And then when we tell them the truth, it's not well received. And it's like, but you said you wanted this and I did this. And then now, it's coming back on me or I'm the bad person here. When it comes to feedback, social media content, if we look across social media, the things that tend to be shared the most are the things that are immediately helpful. Can we allow our feedback to follow that same intention? Are we giving feedback that's immediately helpful? I hear from young people all the time, the feedback that they get from their coach highlights the problem, but doesn't help them take a different action or a better action in the future. So can it be helpful when it comes to feedback? Example, and this is one I use in coaching often. And basketball is my coaching background, if let's say I've got a point guard that the last 2 times down the floor has turned the ball over, third time down, another turnover. Can't sub her out because we only have one point guard. We need her to be on the floor. What a coach might say in a moment of frustration in that context is, you can't keep turning it over. And that kid's like, yeah, no kidding. This isn't great for me either. We give feedback about what's true, but it's not helpful. I would be better served to say, hey, next time down the floor, change your body position to protect the ball, pass with your outside hand. Give them information that's helpful. They know they made a mistake. They don't want to be in that moment. Not only did they make a mistake, immediately, because they value the opinions of others, they are thinking, what is everybody else on my team, in the stands, in this space, thinking about the mistake that I just made? This is a big mental load. So can we give them feedback that's helpful? Teach and transfer. Ideally, as coaches, this is our pursuit. Can we teach them what we know and transfer ownership of that knowledge as quickly as possible to the point that they become self-generating and self-correcting, which is the SGSC you see there. Teach them what we know, transfer that ownership. Because of the internet, you as a coach are no longer the sole knowledge keeper for an individual's growth and development in their sport. There are a myriad of experts worldwide, some more experienced or knowledgeable than ourselves, that they can get information from. So it benefits us as quickly as possible. Teach them what we know. Enable them to have the knowledge that they need to self-correct, to self-generate when they face challenge and adversity. 3 gates, truth plus action. I'm going to skip over 3 gates, although I love it. Truth plus action. This is the most effective formula I've seen or experienced recently for giving feedback to young people. Can we tell them the truth? And in the same conversation, can we tell them at least one action step that they can choose to take, there's that language of choice, if they want to change the current truth or situation as it exists? Tell them the truth, give them an action. So often we stop at the truth. I need to let you know that starting with tomorrow's game, you're no longer going to be in the starting lineup. Give them an action. That's what feels most helpful, most supportive, so that they can have a shot, or at least feel like they have some semblance of control in a situation that, by and large, is your decision as a coach. All right, shadow of the future. It's challenging because I want to tell you everything, but we don't have time to do all of it. I'm going to skip over shadow of the future for now. But if you're really interested in it, shoot me an email. We can have that conversation at a different time. Okay, embrace. Gen Z is unique. You may have noticed. So embracing who they and how they are increases our coachability, flexibility, and well-being. This is largely about you as the coach. If we're seeking to connect with and better communicate with the young women that we're coaching today, you first need to look inward. And in the book Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott, a question that she often asks internally when she meets one-on-one with her team members is, what are you pretending not to know? What are you pretending not to know? And you might hear that and think like, you mean, what am I lying about? It's not meant to be that. It's, what do you know to be true that you wish wasn't true? What have you pushed aside or swept under the rug? Put it in the context of coaching today's young people. What are you pretending not to know? Are you pretending not to know that you do have judgment about some of the values that you don't see exhibited that are really important to you or to older generations? Are you pretending not to know that, yeah, pretty early you labeled that kid as lazy, and if we're being honest, you've treated them differently ever since? What are you pretending not to know? Start there and see what comes up. In an effort to embrace coachability, and oftentimes we hear coachability used in the context of the athlete. How coachable is the athlete? In the work that I do as an executive coach with coaches and with teams, I almost always mean it in the context of the coach. What is our ability? What is our capacity? What is our agility to be dynamic and responsive to the individuals in front of us? How many different ways can you explain the same drill or the same skill or the same concept to be most receptive to the person that's looking to learn it? The more we increase our ability to educate, to teach, to have better quality conversations, to ask better questions, the more effective we stand to be, the more connected we stand to be with today's young people. Barriers and parents. I'm going to skip over barriers, but I am going to talk about parents. Y'all, if you are not yet there, we are fully in a space where it benefits us as coaches to be intentional about embracing our athletes' parents. And I know some of them may seem like prickly cactuses that you're like, no, Betsy, I can't, I won't. When we don't, we often experience negative outcomes professionally. And I've seen way too many people, especially females at all levels of sport, lose their jobs because the parents incited a campaign involving the athletes to get that coach fired or removed. At best, it's an investigation that's inconclusive. That coach is forever scarred by having gone through that investigation and then being tasked to coach the athletes without any kind of retribution or retaliation while they don't know who brought the allegations against them. We can do better. So embracing your parents, being really clear early on, welcoming your parents into the program, being very clear early on, setting expectations. Here's what they can expect of you as their child's coach. Here's what you expect of them as parents. Here's how you'd love to see their support, give them choices, invite them into. And here's what in our program we won't tolerate. And here's the clear outcomes or consequences they might experience if they make the choice to engage in certain behaviors. Be clear about how you're going to communicate to them, when you're going to communicate to them. If they have something they want to talk about, I don't know, playing time, how they can communicate that to you, what you will or won't talk about with them, because you're seeking to teach their daughters to advocate for themselves. These are conversations that we can have. Respect. Gen Z demands respect, and that demand word might sound pretty intense. It's meant to be so. So our opportunity is to start to learn why some of the old adages no longer apply, and also how we can show and earn respect with today's young people. Whenever I talk to a member of Gen Z or Alpha about respect, Aretha Franklin is playing in the background. RESPECT, find out what it means to me. Except in this context, for us as coaches, find out what it means to them. I had a young woman verbatim tell me not 2 weeks ago, I'm not going to respect you just because you're older than me. That doesn't make any sense. And I was like, yeah, I guess, okay, yeah. When I talk with young people, here's the challenge. I'll ask them, let's say you just started with a new team. From day one that you show up at practice with that new team, new coach, do you expect that that coach will show you respect? They say yes. And then I'll ask a follow-up question. Okay, so you expect that coach will show you respect. Are you then also committed to showing that coach respect from day one? Most of them say no. And this is when Betsy has to do some emotional regulation on her own and find her professional words and say something like, okay, help me understand. I want to be really clear. What you're saying is you expect to be respected from the beginning, but you won't show respect until it's earned. And they'll say yes. Big challenge. And there's a lot that we can do. This idea of respecting your elders, and I was absolutely raised in a generation where, in addition to good manners, respecting your elders was something that I can remember from my earliest years. It's not true in the same way for many of today's young people. So have the conversation. What does respect mean? What does it sound like? What does it not sound like? What does it look like? What does it not look like? When you do this, now we have shared understanding. Now we're really clear on what's respectful and what's disrespectful. Because an additional challenge I often hear from young people today, coach totally disrespected me in practice. And I'll say, oh, tell me more, what happened? And then they'll mention a situation or scenario and the language used. And to me, that simply sounds like coaching. No, coach coached you today. Coach held you accountable today. This is why it's really important that we have clarifying conversations about respect before we find ourselves in a situation where some of the language used by parents and players has been weaponized to threaten our livelihood or career. We can have these conversations. I'm going to skip over the chat acronym. Again, all of this is meaningful and important, and I apologize that I don't have more time to. I'm going to back that up because as women, we often apologize for things outside of our control. Instead, I'm going to lean into gratitude and say, thank you for being flexible in what I share in this space, knowing that we don't have time for all of it, even though I feel like all of it is valuable, and that's a challenge for me. I'm going to skip over chat, and I'm going to go to global citizens. One of the qualities of this generation that I love is that this generation is arguably more empathetic than previous generations, in part because of technology. They've had access to information about what's going on with people their age or with people in different countries or different parts of the world outside of their sphere in which they've grown up in. We see them more socially engaged. We see them more actively engaged in global issues like climate change. The empathy is high. The challenge when it comes to respect is what happens to one happens to all. So even if in maybe a moment that wasn't your best, you have an interaction at practice with an individual and there's some level of disrespect demonstrated there. Even though it happened with that one person, everybody acknowledges it and in some way feels it. Let's say at the end of practice, you call that individual over and you say, hey, I want to circle back on what happened earlier. That wasn't my best moment. If I had to go back, I would have said this. You repair with that individual, and then they leave and you think everything's good. Unfortunately, it's not. You repair with that one individual, but what they do or don't share about that repair does or doesn't impact how the others have experienced that disrespect. It sounds wild, but we are better served, especially in moments where disrespect may have happened with a singular individual in a public, meaning team, visible way, to repair. But then when it's appropriate, acknowledge to the team, hey, that interaction, the thing I said the other day, that wasn't my best moment. And I want to let you know we had a conversation. You don't have to get super specific, share what is appropriate to share or not share. But if we don't repair with the whole, the disrespect stands even though they weren't actively involved. This is where we are today. All right, the last one, support. Gen Z thrives with support, and our opportunity is to create environments that optimize growth and champion love. If love sounds too soft for you, substitute the word care. That's something that most coaches can get behind. When it comes to support, the one question, I do thousands of athlete interviews, and one question I love asking is, who is your favorite coach in the history of your sport and why? The names are different. The why is always the same. Whoever they name as their favorite coach, the why was because that they knew that person cared about them and valued them as a person, separate from how they played or performed. That relationship, that care was never in jeopardy based on how they played or performed. So is that true for every young person that you're coaching today? If it's not yet true, explore what needs to happen in order for that to be true, for that to be felt, that separate from how you play or perform, I still care about you the same. I'm still valuing you as a person, separate from the outcome. I'm going to put these up here, and we're just going to touch on two of them. So reframing failure. One thing that we've learned, especially with this generation, again, technology, social media, the judgment of others, the various arenas or ways that that judgment can filter into a young person's life. This has resulted in it being challenging for many young people to separate out, I've experienced a failure from I am a failure. For many of them, these are intricately linked, which is why it benefits us to be very intentional about starting to reframe failure. What does failure mean? What does it not mean? What does it look like? What does it not look like? Are we being intentional about teaching elements related to a growth mindset? Are we being intentional about creating in our sport environment elements of psychological safety, so that they stand a better chance of risking things, knowing that if this doesn't work out, I'm going to be okay? And that leads us to the last one, a new take on resilience. Historically, resilience has been thought to be built by putting people through hard things. If we have them do enough hard things over time and they keep surviving and coming out the other side, they're going to become more resilient organically. By and large, not true for the young people that we're coaching today. What we see when we put them through hard thing after hard thing after hard thing is instead of becoming more resilient, they become less resilient. They're so depleted that they don't feel like they have anything left to go tackle the next challenge. So what if we flip that? What if we were so intentional and explicit about the various avenues for support, self-support, collaborative support, resource professional support, to the point that each young woman that we're working with had so much support around them that they felt like, heck yeah, I can try that thing. If it doesn't work out, I'm good. Like I have so much support around me. That can be one of the goals that we have in the coaching profession. I want to thank you in appreciation for your time today. If you have feedback on anything that you saw or experienced, that top QR code is for you. My work is largely driven by what's coming up for coaches and athletes in the sports landscape. So if there's something that you would love to share, I would love to hear it. If you'd like to explore additional resources related to communication, the bottom QR code is for you. My email is there on the screen. The website's also there. If there's something top of mind for you, please reach out. I only get to do what I get to do because all of you are committed to doing the work that you do as coaches. So again, in genuine gratitude, thank you for what you do for young people. And I'm so excited, especially as the mom of 2 little girls, to have them grow up in an environment where people like you are intentional about education like this, so you can offer the best quality experience. So thank you.